Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to discuss managing difficult family interactions in long-term care and practical strategies to reduce risk. My name's Shannon. I am a clinical risk manager with CareAgents, and I will be monitoring today's topic, which will be presented by our Chief Risk Officer, Toni Malicdem. And just a few housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees will remain on mute throughout the presentation, please. If you have any questions or comments during the hour, please do feel free to add them into the Q&A feature at any time, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end. At the conclusion, please do help us out by filling out the short questionnaire to help us better serve you for future topics. A link to the recording and the slides will be sent out to all attendees at the conclusion of the webinar, and for any nursing home administrators seeking continuing education credits, we will file your attendance for those credits with NAB, and those certificates will be sent to you soon. And keep in mind, this webinar is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Consult with a qualified attorney for advice specific to your situation. We are speaking from a risk management perspective only today. And just a quick note about who we are. CareAgents is a liability insurance solution for senior living communities. We offer specialized coverages, comprehensive risk management, and claim support, and we specialize in the senior living continuum of care. We also have technology partners and provide our clients access to their systems. Wound Rounds is a point of care wound management and prevention solution, and Virtue Sense, our other partner, offers technology to help prevent falls through predictive monitoring and accurate alerting. All right. So, hi, I'm Shannon. I'm a clinical risk manager with clinical experience working across the continuum of care, mostly in CCRCs. I have a master's in public health and a clinical foundation in occupational therapy. So I bring a blend of analytical skills and hands-on resident safety experience to our team. Toni's unique career path has equipped her with a holistic understanding of the senior living industry. She started as a social worker in a nursing home, eventually rising to the position of administrator. And later, Toni transitioned into the insurance field, where she leveraged her firsthand knowledge of senior living operations to provide consultation and support to clients. And her background as a social worker and administrator with that risk management lens allows her to be in a unique position to discuss today's topic. And with that, I will pass it over to Toni.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Shannon. Appreciate it. And thanks for everybody's time today. I will go over some of our objectives and then we'll just kind of dive right in. So the first objective is really about discussing some of the common causes of the difficult family member interactions in senior living. So this includes things like expectation misalignment, communication breakdowns, and emotional stress. I really will spend most of the time kind of on this objective or this topic area, helping to identify areas that we should be aware of, ways we can really work together to encourage better communication and outcomes. Some of our other objectives today will include recognizing early indicators that family interactions may escalate into complaints, regulatory concerns, litigation, or claims. Our third objective includes demonstrating effective de-escalation and communication techniques to manage challenging conversations with family members and how to do that professionally and empathetically. Another objective of today's webinar includes how to apply boundary setting strategies that support resident-centered care while protecting staff and organizational interests. Our fifth objective is to help implement documentation and follow-up practices that support clear communication and really can help to reduce professional liability exposure. And the last objective includes how we can integrate proactive family communication strategies into daily operations to reduce conflict and support some of these risk management objectives that we mentioned here. So let's jump in and discuss some common causes of the difficult family interactions in senior living. So as I mentioned, this may include expectation misalignment, communication breakdowns, emotional stress. This is a lot packed into this area. And again, I'm going to spend most of the webinar talking about these areas on the front end, and we'll talk about some possible solutions and proactive ways to address. So expectation misalignment, often causes difficult family interactions throughout the resident stay at your community. So family members really may not understand the limitations of staff, the realities of what residential care looks like, or the unavoidable progression of illnesses. Really, this can lead to frustration when outcomes don't match their anticipations. Often, people may be coming from other levels of care and may have preconceived notions about what type of care they should receive or how that care should look while at your community. So thinking about the person really who might come from the hospital, for example, and has never had any prior experience with a skilled nursing facility and expects one-on-one care. Or think about the resident who, was receiving care from their family at home and has never been to an assisted living setting, did not realize what level of assistance or lack of assistance maybe, was or was not offered. They may not be familiar with that. So another area of the expectation misalignment often comes into play when staff expect residents and family members to be knowledgeable about how nursing homes work, how assisted living communities work. But most of the time, again, they're not familiar with that. They haven't been exposed to this level of care before. Often, as I mentioned, they compare it with a hospital setting or what they were doing at home. And this expectation misalignment between family and staff on the perception of division of care and tasks really creates a tension right from the start. So, how to better align expectations? Well, the first is having intentional conversations. Really, they have to be had. We've got to think of them as a must do. If you don't have one already, think about creating a process where meetings are conducted within 72 hours of admission for all residents, whether that person is coming in for short-term care, as a long-term resident, a respite stay, whatever it may be. Think about including the resident if they're appropriate, and any and all family members, responsible parties, anybody who might be involved in that resident's care. If any of you are a client of CareAgents or K&B Specialty Insurance, really feel free to reach out to us after the conclusion of the webinar. We're happy to share some templates for communication program or help you kind of support you through creating a program if you'd like that support. We're happy to come out to the building and provide education and leadership training on communication best practices. So kind of back to the initial care plan meeting. You can call that meeting whatever you'd like to call it, but there should be a champion for this process. Who's going to be in charge of scheduling these meetings? Who will reach out to the family? Who will document the meeting after it's completed? What will be documented? So think about a champion and the process. But really think about creating a more or less structured agenda of topic areas to discuss. And this meeting is not meant to be the time where you're signing your admission paperwork or your admission agreement necessarily. This meeting is to discuss who can help address concerns or questions should they come up at any time throughout the resident's stay. This is where you might be giving, a brief discussion on what your community can and cannot provide. This is where you're asking what questions the resident or the family might have, what are their expectations, and what are their goals. Think about your management staff and the fact that they should be discussing the risks that the resident presents with, what interventions might look like for those risk areas. And when I say risks, I mean things like falls, mobility issues, skin issues, pressure injuries, barriers to returning home. So there could be various risks or areas that need to be planned for. And so thinking about those and making sure your staff and managers are trained to have those discussions. So a little more about this initial meeting with residents and family members. I may refer to this again as a care plan meeting throughout the presentation, but certainly, call this meeting whatever you'd like. You should be discussing areas such as diagnoses, disease processes, and again, risks such as fall, skin issues. But you want to be discussing explicit capabilities in areas that the facility cannot accommodate. So this might be a time where, you would ask for a family spokesperson if there are multiple members present, so that you have a main person to communicate with throughout the resident's stay. You can ask, or should be asking, what the goals and desires are for the resident, preferences, how often they would like to receive communication, and how they like to receive that communication. Are phone calls preferred? Do they want information via email? What are you going to communicate, and how are you going to communicate it? How often? This is where you might also ask for input on ways that the family members present, can help with things like focusing on the highest quality of care. How can they feel like a partner and responsible to focus on, highest quality of care, providing the utmost care to meet their expectations. So ask about, what ways they feel, would be helpful or impactful to keep their loved one, such as preventing falls. So if they have ideas, you want to hear what those are. At the end of this meeting, it's really important to recap the highlights, determine any follow-up, next steps, or ongoing communication that's going to be necessary, and set the stage for that. Document the meeting, including, who was present, general topics discussed, risks that were touched on, and whether the attendees, verbalized their understanding and participated. So what's next? After that initial care plan meeting is held, again, the goal is really to hold that within the first 72 hours of that resident coming to your community. Then you likely have established how frequent the involved family members and responsible party, would like to receive communication. Next, there should be ongoing touch points and a cadence for communication. So not just when the nurse might be calling to either report an incident or report an injury, or, to notify of transferring to the hospital. This cadence could be weekly call if there's a lot of anxiety and uneasiness. Maybe this is a monthly call just to check in and see how the family's experience has been, sharing a little bit about the resident's progress or possibly the lack thereof. Maybe updating on fall risk or discharge planning, or really any necessary information. It would be best to document these reach outs and these conversations briefly, as well as anytime you provide any sort of education to the family member or the resident. So really this style of communication creates these open lines, and hopefully when, the family member or the loved ones have questions or concerns, they feel comfortable approaching you and having those conversations. And this really helps to build an open, trusting relationship, if you will. So communication breakdowns, it's really important to just recognize how imperative communication really is. In senior living, I like to say that we are in the relationship business. Yes, we're caring for people, but building and maintaining relationships is really the crux of what we do. So when thinking about breakdowns in communication, we should recognize that, poor information flow or inconsistent updates really create confusion and uncertainty, and that really leads to lack of trust. Inconsistent messages providing conflicting information from different staff will add to these issues. Cultural or language barriers may impact misunderstanding and affect perspectives on aging and care. And after an incident, any sort of delayed or vague communication may really fuel frustration and may leave family members feeling unsupported, ignored, or even lied to. So let's talk about ways to improve communication. So Starts with the initial care plan meeting, as I mentioned earlier, and communication from day one needs to be spot on. That's the best way to improve communication or be proactive. So think about who in your community welcomes your new residents, the new family members. Is there a welcome call placed to new family members? If so, how soon after admission? Who does it? What is said? What's the purpose of it? In my eyes, the purpose is really to, again, make sure that person feels welcomed and start communication and relationship building early on. Throughout the resident's stay, there's likely to be a changing condition at some point. So think about calling another informal or a formal in-person meeting if there is any sort of significant change in condition, or if there is a need to discuss care. Be as proactive as you can. Provide education, discuss risks, plan of care, and options. This is particularly important, for residents who thought that they would be discharging home, for example, and actually end up needing long-term care. This can be important when there's been a significant decline in cognition or behavior or overall health with residents with dementia, Alzheimer's. So end-of-life discussions may need to take place. Can't wait for the physician to start those conversations. Again, it has to be proactive and early, especially because they are sensitive matters. When it comes to post-incident communication, this area is so important, but think about training nurses and management on best ways to communicate incident details, any injury information, and interventions, with communicating facts in a plan without being defensive or admitting fault. I know that can be hard, can be difficult, but following up with a final investigation in a timely fashion is all important. For family members or responsible parties who constantly complain, really try not to shy away from that conflict. Really, that is one of the most important parts. Is you may want to determine who is the best person to communicate regularly from the staff or the management team and set up some of those ongoing calls or that cadence that I mentioned earlier to communicate anything new or different, even when status quo is happening. So you can certainly slow down that cadence of calls once the complaints have slowed or positive feedback is being shared. Ways to enhance communication, maybe most importantly, when, making sure that staff have knowledge, have the experience and support with communication expectations. So incorporate communication training for all frontline staff upon hire throughout the year. Training for management department heads and at the community is essential, and that likely would look a little different from training frontline staff. We'll talk a little bit more about education later on in the presentation. So let's talk about emotional stress. Emotional stress from family members or residents, loved ones often cause or even just add to the difficult family interactions throughout the resident's stay at your community. So some emotional stress that's common is guilt and grief. Guilt is really complicated. It's layered. It's often unavoidable. It's really an emotional response that is common when transitioning a loved one to senior living. There is often a cultural pressure to provide care for the resident and their loved one. Some may feel that they're breaking a promise to always keep a loved one at home and care for them. Family members, may be showing the fear that the resident may feel abandoned, and they never want their loved one to feel that way. Grief is really heavy, and residents often feel this. Family members often transfer those feelings onto themselves and then pair it with the guilt. Family members also transfer these feelings onto staff. And I'm sure in all of your experience at a senior living building, you know that most times staff don't respond well to that. So just sometimes being aware of it and can be a solution. We'll talk about a few more, but being aware that some of these areas can be difficult to recognize is the first barrier to overcome when it comes to emotional stress. On top of the family guilt, it can be difficult for family members to just let someone else care for their loved one, but they may also be feeling caregiver burnout at the same time. Family may be struggling to redefine their relationship with a loved one. And then there may be certainly some unresolved pre-existing family tension or childhood issues resurfacing, things that you at the building are not privy to prior. Family dynamics within the resident's relationship with those family members are difficult to perceive unless you have that knowledge or someone shares that with you. So how can we manage the emotional stress that we're identifying? Again, let's go back to the staff training. So we want to be training our staff to recognize guilt and grief and prepare a proper empathetic response. There was a study of nurses that showed a significant perceived change in confidence working with family members after receiving proper training in how to deal with those difficult family members. We want to think about asking questions and actively listening with our customers, those family members, those responsible parties, acknowledging feelings, being empathetic, comforting them, and educating and informing those family members on what the facility, what the community can and cannot do. How will you keep the loved one as safe as possible? Informing them on the fact that you focus on the highest quality of care that you're able to provide, and how you will keep them informed of changes. Most importantly, maintain communication and an attitude of willing to listen and help. The willing to listen sometimes is the biggest part that people want to know that they are getting from you. Our next objective here is again to think about how we can recognize early indicators when family interactions may escalate into complaints, regulatory concerns, lawsuits, claims, things of that nature. Excuse me. So, to recognize signs of escalation, take notice of people with persistent complaints about care or people that have increasingly aggressive complaints. Think about others who have increased their observation or monitoring, such as showing up at unusual times to visit the resident, recording interactions, having detailed timelines about incidents. Think about or be aware of, family members who might report to upper management that they felt that their questions are often dismissed or left unanswered, really kind of showing a pattern, if you will. So, what to do about these identified signs or patterns? Well, the key is to face any concerns, questions, customer service complaints, communication lapses, whatever we're calling all of these areas, head on. Don't shy away. That may include going to visit the family member at the resident's room or apartment, making a call, or asking for some time to meet with that resident's family member. That may include reaching out to the person or people that are having those concerns, or to the identified family spokesperson, as we mentioned earlier, which, may include some boundary setting that we'll discuss later in the webinar here. So you may need to ask about ways that they'd like the issue rectified and what information they would like regularly or as a follow-up. So you need to decide when you need to get someone else involved. So, if you're frontline staff, when do you notify the administrator, the executive director, or the wellness director, director of nursing? When should the regional person or the chief nursing officer, CEO, COO be notified? When do you need to pull in compliance or legal counsel if you're really concerned, or if at all? You may want to create some sort of chain or escalation or call tree to really ensure that customer service complaints concerned are attended to appropriately. Again, as they escalate, you may have these concerns. So let's talk a bit more about de-escalation. So demonstrating effective de-escalation and communication techniques to manage challenging conversations with family members professionally and empathetically can be difficult. So let's just think, what is de-escalation really? Well, it's really, a time where we're trying to reduce the tension of a conflict or a tense situation, and we may not have solutions to the original complaint during these specific interactions, but the de-escalation, does involve strong emotions such as anger, sadness, frustration, or aggression. And we want it to be met with calm and kindness. If the person is not an immediate threat to themselves or others, there's often time to diffuse the situation. And so keeping that in mind as you approach kind of this topic is important. Techniques include first moving to a private meeting location and removing some triggers. You must remain calm and professional, using a calm voice, an even tone, an appropriate volume, all really important when communicating with someone who is upset, angry, mad, sad, some of those emotions we mentioned. Speaking softly, slowly, and clearly to lower the tension is essential. And, all frontline staff in management should be, again, receiving training on the importance of staying calm and composed, no matter the behavior that that customer or family member, is presenting, as mentioned earlier. Provide some support, nonverbal communication support, such as having open arms, soft eye contact, and nodding. Trying to make sure that the staff that are interacting with this family member who might be upset, that they know it's important to remain non-confrontational, to try to make sure they're not being defensive, which I know can be difficult. But active listening is key. So listen without interrupting, allowing the family member to vent their frustrations first. It really will help you, understand how the person is feeling and improve any subsequent interactions. Most times, listening calms a person down all in itself. I can't tell you how many times in my work as really just a nursing home administrator, dealing with the daily operations, that a person who is really fired up at the beginning just needed to be heard, and the listening solved most of what the issue was at the beginning. You do want to acknowledge feelings, validate emotions, and acknowledge those feelings by, saying things like, I understand why this is frustrating, or I see how much you care. Using the I statements to express needs, such as, I want to ensure your loved one is safe, and avoid defensive statements. A couple other areas to touch on for de escalation techniques include using an empathy first approach. So reflect, back when you're hearing from them and validate their experiences, saying something like, that must be really difficult, or wow, I really hear what you're saying. Teaching staff proper language and empathy really is meaningful, and it's not feeling sorry for someone, but really trying to put yourself in that person's shoes and understand what they might be going through and why they might be feeling a certain way. It's important to acknowledge feelings, thank the person for sharing their information, and doing things like, using clear, simple, direct language. It's also really important to use problem solving, which can include focusing on solutions, offering choices. And a person may escalate a situation because really they don't feel that they have any other options, or because they feel that they've lost autonomy or control. I'm sure you can all think of experiences like that in your own life, and times you've felt that way. So that really, creates feelings of vulnerability or anxiety. So think about offering choices and allowing that person to have input on how to proceed. Really ends up giving them back some area of control. It's so important to think about avoiding excuses. And lastly, really, you may need to set up a plan for follow-up. So provide a defined timeline to ensure that they know when they will hear back from you if there's things that need to be communicated. And if possible, make that time frame as short as possible. This will show the accountability of the situation and that it's important to you. So please remember to not be intolerant of complaints. You should be welcoming those feedback and concerns any and all at all times. Although difficult, try to avoid snappy retorts and do not rush when you're engaged with someone, who might be upset or sharing negative feedback. Give them your undivided attention if at all possible. Try not to ignore requests for information. And remember not to fail to recognize any sort of verbal or physical threats. We also don't want to avoid, or we want to avoid overreacting to people or situations. And when speaking with family members, be sure to try to avoid disruptions, giving, again, undivided attention. So if you're in your office and you're talking with them, ensuring that, whether it's the receptionist or someone that can provide, privacy for a short bit, we don't want staff, knocking on the door asking for assistance. We want that person to have your undivided attention. This helps to show how important their time, feedback, and satisfaction is to you. We'll discuss boundary setting next, which may need to happen in certain situations. So, applying boundary setting strategies that support resident-centered care while protecting staff and organizational interests. This is what we'll dive into now. Ensure that staff really know what appropriate service recovery looks like and when they can or should apply boundaries versus when management should step in and do some of those same things. So we want to be training our staff on who can be mentioned for follow-up from management. Should they say that the administrator will call you tomorrow, or the director of nursing will call you this evening, or the night supervisor will call? Who can they mention can be available for follow-up? And how should the staff involve or communicate those needs to management? Should they put a note under your door? Should they be sending you an email? Should they fill out a grievance form? What is the protocol to get this information to the appropriate parties? You should also be setting boundaries early on, really, which can include establishing clear roles, again, at time of admission, and educating them on who to report concerns and complaints to and when. Telling them that you want to know the first moment they have a concern, a question, or a problem. Setting boundaries early include other areas like maintaining emotional distance, refusing personal gifts, favors, limiting self-disclosure, and using assertive communication to uphold your professional limits. When you have someone who might be demanding a lot of your time, you may need to define your role or redefine it and what you do, explain the limits and meaning that you cannot meet with that family member daily, for example, or have multiple calls per day. Instead, you might need to explain what you can do to ensure they receive the communication they're looking for, such as a call every Monday and Friday in the afternoon to discuss their questions, their concerns, provide updates. You may want to consider sharing the load with another manager or the social worker. In the moment, you may have to set boundaries that are more firm. When a family member is not complying with your wishes to calm down and speak appropriately, it might be time to set those boundaries right then and there. And you still need to remain professional and calm, but letting the person know that you cannot listen to them or engage in such a conversation if they continue to yell or use profanity. And you may have to ask them to leave and call you when they're ready to discuss. You need to know also when you need support or when you need to step away because you may not be able to remain calm or speak appropriately. So you may need to identify someone else who can step in and handle the next steps of that conversation. Let's move on and discuss our fifth objective, which is really implementing documentation and follow-up practices that support clear communication and reduce professional liability exposure. So enhance communication between shifts, really to ensure that all staff have the most up-to-date information about resident care, incidents, follow-up needs, family involvement, as well as questions and concerns that need attention. We really don't want anything to fall through the cracks that needs the follow-up or communication. and making sure that everybody has that information is key. You do want to create defensible documentation, which includes info that's really clear and concise, meaning just the facts relevant to the situation or matter at hand, objective information, factual, and timely, before the shift ends. We want it documented. So, document all care plan meetings and conversations of substance with family members. And it can be brief, but communicate any findings and results of those investigations and interventions that the facility will be utilizing. That may include documenting things on grievance forms or incident reports or investigation forms on those more internal processes or areas in the electronic record, and you'll have to decide what's appropriate for progress notes in the resident records and what is not. You don't have to document, every time you're saying hi to someone in the hall necessarily, but if you educated a family member about a resident's need for diabetes medication or discussed appropriate discharge plans, document that in the resident's electronic health record in their chart. If you were not able to address a concern because it's not within your scope, maybe you're a CNA and it's something that leadership may need to address, that's something that likely should be documented in a grievance form or, whatever that protocol is that you've established for your internal communication. Leadership really should be conducting regular audits of documentation, resident charts, looking for any trends or any opportunities for additional education for the staff that is documenting and providing care. Let's move on and discuss how to integrate proactive family communication strategies into daily operations to reduce conflict and support risk management objectives. Proactive family communication strategies include training staff. Again, a lot of this is going back to training staff to make sure they feel equipped on how to engage residents and family members during visits and casual interactions. The most important part here is offering assistance before the resident and family request it. The significance of really saying hello is key, and entering the room when family members are present, offering assistance. A lot of times I know frontline staff want to respect the time that the family have with their loved one or that resident, but just popping in to say hello or see if anything is needed is really important. You can also think about implementing purposeful rounding programs, which have shown to assist with customer service outcomes and communication, as well as areas such as falls, wounds, and pain management. I think a lot of times people often say that they have a rounding program in place, but making sure it is a purposeful round, meaning you're looking at particular areas every time staff enter the room. Again, if you're a client of ours, we're happy to share our purposeful rounding program and some of our templates to implement at your community if that would be helpful. So feel free to reach out to Shannon or I after this webinar today. But yes, consider creating a formal communication program, as I mentioned early on, and ways to consistently connect with those family members. You might consider other areas, creating something like an ambassador program or angel rounds. I've done that in my own work in a skilled nursing building, but assigning a certain department manager or social worker to a wing or a unit of residents, and then think about assigned communication tasks, whether, again, unit manager, department manager, social worker, but creating some sort of protocol to reach out to family members on a routine basis, once a month, for example. You may want to focus on another area, which may include a hot list of residents who have family members that need a little extra TLC. Make a to-do list and assign managers to reach out regularly to discuss questions, concerns, changes in care. This may need to happen more frequently, such as weekly, and you'll have to determine what each person needs and what's appropriate. So here are some things to keep in mind when thinking about difficult family members. So first, strong family relationships and active participation are crucial in the successful care of residents in long-term care settings. Trust really develops over time. We know that involving family members improves communication between our healthcare professionals and our residents, and trust building efforts really can lead to better outcomes in care. There was a study that found that over 3,000 different papers, a collection of them, found that the staff development, education, technology training and support for staff, and the accessibility of information in pamphlets and resources for family were all crucial in facilitating the staff-family communication in long-term care. So those three things were found to be impactful. Again, that's staff development and education, technology training and support for staff, and then the accessibility of information in pamphlets and resources for the family members. So as we come to a close, and we'll get some questions in there shortly, we want to remember that in conclusion, you want to develop communication programs that start with staff education upon hire throughout the year for all staff. You want to be teaching things like empathy. What is it? How to be aware of it? How do you show empathy from your role at the community? The importance of verbal and nonverbal communication, the way you stand, whether your arms are crossed or not, your tone of voice, the speed at which you speak, and almost more importantly, or most importantly, is active listening skills. The importance of all those pieces and how that makes up your overall communication. We want to teach and support staff with key ways to provide service recovery and follow-up. Not everybody is well-versed in that area, and having some key tips and best practices for the protocol in your building is important. You want to help staff be aware of how not to be defensive, how to hear difficult or accusatory feedback without becoming, again, defensive, which can be very difficult. We want you to think about ways to teach staff and make sure that they're aware of who they can ask for support and guidance, and how and when should they be escalating concerns. So those are important things for staff to have as next steps and a solution for what they might feel is a problem. So we want to think about implementing an effective communication program that involves residents and family members. Again, start upon admission and think about ways to connect throughout the resident stay. This should be aimed at all residents and all family members, no matter how long they're at your community. You want to schedule regular meetings with your residents and family members to discuss plans of care, address concerns, and really prevent issues before they escalate. This is a way to really just stay ahead of it all. Implement regular check-in calls that reference specific care details, enhancing personal connections, and really this can impact satisfaction in itself. Again, think about assigning department managers or social workers to a set of residents to disperse the workload. You want to think about a focus on proven programs such as purposeful rounding, as I mentioned, and really meant to be proactive. Face concerns head on and set that tone as early as possible. And overall, really just focus on relationship building. Lastly, ensure that these expectations, processes, and protocols are ingrained in what you do, that it's seen to be an essential part of who you are. Again, if you're a client of K&B Specialty Insurance or CareAgents, please feel free to reach out to Shannon and I or any of our other risk managers you might know. We're happy to share any resources or programs or any of the areas on the topic we've discussed today. I will pass it back, I believe, to Shannon here, and she can let us know if there are any questions. So please feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A feature now. We'll answer as many as we can. And then just briefly, before I answer questions, as a reminder, we'd love for you to fill out the brief survey to provide any feedback or suggestions on future topics. We do have, if you've signed up for today's webinar, you will automatically get an invitation to join our webinar in March. We have one in April as well, with some other topics on this same senior living, things that might be relative for risk management. So we'd love you to be a part of that. A link to the recording and the slides will be sent out to all attendees at the conclusion of the webinar. And if you requested any CEs for a nursing home administrator, we will submit the credit to NAB, but we'll send you a certificate as well. So I will pause there. And Shannon, let me know if you have questions or anything that's coming through.
We do. Let me pull them up. Some tough stuff. Good recommendations. All right. First one, how would you handle a situation where you have a resident who does not want their family member involved, but has dementia and likely cannot make their own decisions?
Oh, yeah. So that's a tough one. So let's think about it. We might want to think about what are the family members' intentions? What are they trying to share, or what are they trying to request? And so you might want to be protective of certain information if there's no power of attorney or legal guardian or advanced directives like that in place. But if they seem to have that resident's best interests at heart, you at least would want someone to be involved. So you really are going to have to judge for yourself if that's a situation. Now, if they're demanding to be involved and all they're doing is complaining or creating issues and not focused on that resident's plan of care or being supportive, they might have an ulterior motive, certainly. But you'll have to remember your HIPAA guidelines and what you can and cannot share. But also remember that involved family members and people that are heard are likely to trust you, to work with you, to over time, complaints might settle. So that is a tricky situation, and you might think about advanced directives for your residents as soon as they're admitted to your community, thinking about ways to address some of those issues early on. Again, proactive if you can be. So I'm not sure that I answered your question, but some thoughts on it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's very situational, as you said. Lots of different types of residents, lots of different types of family members. Being proactive, yeah, love it. Okay, we have a few more, and we still have time. How would you handle a conversation when there's two family members or maybe more, and they're arguing about things like hospice or code status when the resident might not be able to make their wishes known?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another tricky situation. I think when our residents don't have those advanced directives in place and you're trying to help make end of life decisions or think about ways that resident is going to spend their last moments, it can be really difficult. And so sometimes you might want to think about involving the physician to provide a medical perspective to help clear things up in terms of diagnoses, what the outlook or outcomes look like, what the choices are in terms of those next steps. Certainly, you don't want to be in the middle of family members arguing. You might want to think back to, again, if you have advanced directives in place, that's the easiest way. But you might want to think back to those early conversations if you've identified that family spokesperson and that's really been the one who's involved, kind of trying to support those family members and working it out. Sometimes it's just about you providing some education to them. That could be calling in, like I said, the physician or a third-party hospice company to talk through outcomes and what care could look like, and things like, what is a DNR and what can it do? And, a lot of times during this instance that guilt and grief is playing a role there in certain decisions. And so it can be very tricky. If you have an ethics committee at your community, this might be a scenario that's presented to that ethics committee. Something to think about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is in regards to this question, that last one I just asked, but Laura's asking, when can you get the court involved to help regarding protecting a resident from the family?
Yeah, that's a great question. There may be state laws that state by state may have different laws, I should say. But if you have an ombudsman in your state, which I think most states do, the ombudsman is a great opportunity that is like a good next step. Their purpose is to make sure that resident rights are protected. And so sometimes they can intervene, and, they're usually a governmental agency that they're working for. And so they might have some better next steps before you have to seek, law enforcement in any way. But if you know that residents' rights are being infringed upon in any way, you may need to call authorities and report that. But it's a tricky situation because in long-term care, you're kind of responsible for a lot of aspects of that resident's care. And if that resident isn't able to make their own decisions, that's when it gets even trickier of what you can and cannot do. But I think sometimes the ombudsman is a great way to ask for guidance and support. And often they want to help, so they'll welcome that. If you see that person needs a guardian and you need to file for that, that is a significant process, certainly. But I always like the idea of starting with the ombudsman and kind of work with that partner if you can to make sure that resident is as protected as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Good first step, right? Mm-hmm. Laura is also saying that she has seen the police called too on family members.
Yeah, I've done that in my own practice. The last resort, it doesn't always go well, but your job as a leader in the building is often to also protect your staff, other residents, and so you may have to do that if it comes to that. Hopefully it doesn't, but yes, you may need to. It's unfortunate.
Okay, Trevor's asking, we had a situation in which a POA kept escalating with staff and created a hostile environment in which staff felt unsafe while he was in the facility. Resident reports this individual experiences SMI. It escalated to the point where a police report was filed and the individual was issued a trespass order to the facility. The resident is deemed and highly motivated to reestablish visiting privileges for her son. It has been a few months since he was no longer welcome in the facility. Do you have any advice for safe resumption of visiting privileges?
Yeah. Well, if you're a skilled nursing building, I think definitely get your ombudsman involved here. But I have done in the past, this is my own experience. I don't know if this is the right way, but what I would say is that think about basically a supervised visit, so that you're going to say that we're going to do supervised visits for whatever time frame you determine. We're going to try it for 1 month or 3 months, and you're going to allow that person specific days and times they're allowed to visit once a week for an hour, for example, for on Fridays between this time and this time, so that maybe management can be present and maybe can take more of an appropriate action and follow up should they need to. And you can think about ways that you can prepare for that person's visit. If the visitor does this, what will we do next? So if that visitor, yells or swears or leaves the room or, approaches staff, what will be that follow up? Will it be the executive director calling to say that you can no longer visit? Will the manager be there and call the police? Having those next steps to make sure that you're prepared for that actual visit. And I think if the resident is able to make their own decisions, I think it'd be important to educate the resident to say, we would love to give your loved one another chance to visit. We want you to have that time with them, but here are the rules, and make sure they understand that your job is to protect your staff as much as it is to protect that resident, and thinking about ways to kind of try to be open, but thinking about reducing risk if possible. So proactive conversations, I would go for a supervised visit for a certain period of time and schedule the visit. Just some ideas.
Okay. Create the safe space, sustain the safe place,
Yeah,
set those clear boundaries for the meeting. Okay.
that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to use the rest of the time for a couple more questions. Do you recommend family council meetings to help with the communication to family members? They say,
Yeah,
I found this
go ahead.
sometimes turn into a complaint fest,
Mm.
but am open to restarting them. Okay.
Yeah, I've actually started family council myself, and I think they can be useful. I think it for the family members that end up attending, or even just the people that see that you're having those, it just sends a message that, really you're as a leader of the building and in the senior living building, you're open to hearing feedback, you want to hear their wants, their desires, their concerns, their complaints, and you want to make sure they're informed. So if you do a family council meeting, what I might consider doing is, putting a topic list out there, like every month or every quarter, you're going to talk about, this topic. So maybe you're talking about, maybe you have an assisted living building and you're thinking about ways that you can educate family members about a construction that's up and coming. So you might have that on your topic list. Or maybe you're asking for additional help on preventing falls and how they can help to look for hazards in their room. So having kind of a predetermined topic area, and that way you're sending the message that you want to provide information to make sure that they know what's happening in your community, what's new, what's different, what's changing. But maybe there's a small amount of time that's left for questions and concerns. And I think it's always okay to preface a meeting like this is, if you have anything specific to your loved one, let's, let's have another conversation. I'll be around after for the next hour, or you feel, here's my contact information, here's how you can reach me. But I think those can be helpful because I think it sets a nice precedent to openness, and again, thinking about creating the trust and the relationship that you want. So
And sometimes
yeah.
it might be like the only way you get that feedback directly
Mhm.
from the families. And sometimes they might not be comfortable with that one-on-one sort of communication connection.
Mhm.
And like you said, active listening is the key here. So it does provide a space for that. All right. And somebody's just asking about the slides. So yes, a copy of the slides will be sent out via email. I think a copy of the recording too. But
Yes, we'll
yeah,
send that all out.
perfect.
All right.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye bye.